Welcome to Quantum Vault. This journey is not something to watch casually. It is an experience that leads you inward to the place where the true story has been waiting for you to remember, the identity your soul has always known it belongs to. The micro shift is not a major event, not a clear turning point, and not a spiritual sign you have to interpret. It is simply a very thin point in awareness, a tiny beat that makes the whole reality slide a little. This beat makes no sound, but your body reacts first as if some deep layer has just received a new signal. You do not need to try to understand it. It appears on its own like a strange breath in your lungs, a subtle redirection in your energy flow, a slight deviation as if you have just stepped through an invisible doorway that your mind has not yet recognized. The body always moves before awareness, and this moment is the clearest proof. You are doing something ordinary, sitting in a familiar room or walking on a path you have taken hundreds of times, yet suddenly something becomes unfamiliar. A monk passed a scarcely morning bar sitting in a familiar mortuary. It is not the scene that changes, it is you who no longer stands at the exact same point. You are still there, but not at the same degree of perception. It feels like being shifted 1 millimeter in space, but 1 meter in the deeper layers of life. It appears not to shock you, but to open the first crack leading into the field where your true frequency is waiting. When this micro shift happens, most people ignore it because the old mind always tries to name everything with logic. You will think it is just fatigue, just lack of sleep, just overload. But if you are sensitive enough, you will notice something strange. This deviation does not feel uncomfortable. It does not pull you down. It opens you up. It separates you from the old rhythm to prepare you for a new energetic field. Those who have experienced micro-awakening all describe the same thing. They see a familiar room and feel that it carries a different layer of air. They look at an ordinary object like a glass on the table and suddenly sense that it is carrying a vibration they have never noticed before. This is not an illusion. This is the sign that your frequency is slipping out of the old orbit. When you slip out of the old rhythm, everything around you stays still, but you are no longer anchored to the old axis. The mind will not understand immediately, but intuition knows clearly. You no longer match your previous version. This tiny deviation marks the beginning of expansion. Expansion never comes from big explosions. It always arrives through the first micro movements that only those who are present enough can feel. You may feel your chest slightly lighter, your breath deeper but not heavy. Time feels like it moves 1 beat slower, and the sounds around you echo as if they are layered. Reality becomes like a thin membrane, and you feel as if you are standing behind that membrane, looking outward. What changes is not the world, but your position in the world. When you notice this deviation, you have stepped into the early stage of the field, where the deepest layers of perception begin to reveal themselves. The field does not open through rituals or knowledge. It opens through a sensitivity in awareness that only those who have nearly completed their old cycle can recognize. This tiny shift is like listening to a familiar song and suddenly noticing an extra layer of sound you've never heard before. It is not that the song added instruments. It is you who changed the frequency of perception. The most important thing is not to run away or doubt this moment. Do not try to force it into logical explanations. Do not convince yourself that you imagined it, and do not try to cling to it. Let it open in its own rhythm. The field always tests first with this micro deviation. If you are ready, it will lead you deeper. If you panic or doubt, you will close it without knowing what you just missed. The micro shift is the way the field asks whether it is time to raise your frequency. This is the first invitation, and not everyone can hear it. Those who hear it are always the ones ready to step out of their old version without needing a strong push from life. The field never begins with drama. It begins with subtlety. and that subtlety is the sign of a new layer of perception. When you feel the slight deviation, you are being moved in the right direction. You are not losing connection. You are reconnecting. You are not falling out of reality. You are sliding into another layer of reality. The body is always honest. It is the first layer to receive expansion. When you feel the deviation signal, stay quiet. Let your breath follow the new rhythm of your being. Observe without interfering. That moment is the intersection between the old timeline closing and the new timeline opening. When you stand between these two frequencies, you will feel as if you are walking on a thin bridge where no one guides you, but everything becomes very clear. You do not need anyone to confirm that you are awakening. The micro deviation is already the proof. This is the moment you become wider than yourself. This is the moment the small weights of daily life begin to lose their gravity. And this is also the moment your body prepares to enter the next chapter. The field does not open for those who are deeply asleep. It opens for those ready to look into their true nature. And everything begins with one tiny deviation that is enough to open the entire path ahead. You begin to notice that the old identity is dissolving, not through big signs, but through very quiet movements. There is a layer inside you that is slowly separating from the stories you once believed were your entire self. These stories can be fears, expectations, reaction patterns, the way you see yourself, and the roles you used to carry in order to be accepted. None of these disappear in a single moment. They break apart little by little, like light touching a thin layer of ice, and you can feel the cracking without hearing any sound. When the identity begins to dissolve, the first thing you notice is the looseness in your emotions. Things that once triggered strong reactions no longer control you easily. Judgments you once feared begin to lose their weight. People you once relied on to define your worth no longer stand in the same position in your mind. It's not them who change, it is you who is shifting away from the old layer of consciousness. The old identity always operates through memory and reflex. It wants everything to stay the same because that is where it feels safe. But when the field has touched you, the old system begins to destabilize. Not because you did something wrong, but because a new layer of perception is appearing and the old version can no longer match this frequency. There will be days when you find yourself no longer interested in things that once brought you joy. There will be moments when you look at yourself and feel a strange unfamiliarity, as if you're observing someone whose time has expired. When the old identity dissolves, the most noticeable sign is that the inner silence becomes wide. This spaciousness is not the frightening emptiness, it is the new space where you will form your next self. But because the mind is not used to this stillness, you may feel slightly lost, slightly disoriented, as if a familiar room has been cleared of all furniture, leaving a blankness that makes you unsure where anything belongs. That is a good sign, not loss, preparation. When you begin to look at old reactions and see that they no longer fit, that is when the identity is leaving you. You will also notice that you no longer attach yourself to old roles the way you used to. The strong one to hide fear, the overly kind one to keep peace, the successful one to avoid judgment. These roles begin to fall off on their own. They can no longer hold their weight because you have seen their nature clearly. The clearer you see them, the faster they dissolve. This dissolution sometimes creates a sense of uncertainty, like not knowing who you are when you no longer cling to your old roles. But remember that every new self is born from the dissolution of the old version. You cannot keep the old and expect the new. You must become lighter to step into another frequency. The dissolving identity does not mean you are losing yourself. You are only letting go of the parts that are not you. The true part inside remains intact, even clearer as the old shells fall away. You will feel a lightness in thought, a spaciousness in your chest, and a sharper observation toward the reactions that once controlled you. When the old self dissolves, you no longer react from instinct. You begin to respond from awareness. No more chasing emotions, no more clinging to fear, no more trying to please others. No more placing your worth in the eyes of the outside world. All of these are signs that you are stepping into a deeper layer of the field. The old identity dissolves in silence because it does not want your attention. It fears being seen. Any part of the identity loses its power when exposed to light, and when you begin to see it, it can no longer control you. This is why the awakening journey is not about searching for something outside, but about looking deeply within. In this phase, you need only one thing: honesty with yourself. Honesty about what still fits. Honesty about what has expired. Honesty about what you are still holding even when it no longer has a reason to stay. This honesty is like standing in stillness and watching each piece of the old self fall away with calm. No forcing, no fighting, only observing. When you are silent enough to observe, the old identity has no ground left to cling to. It dissolves because you are no longer feeding it energy. When the old layer dissolves, you will begin to see another self emerging. A self that is lighter, wider, less fearful, less defensive, less dependent. This is your true self. It does not need to perform. It does not seek approval. It does not try to prove anything. It simply stands still and radiates a grounded presence that others can feel even when you say nothing. You are in the transition between two versions. One version is falling apart. One version is being installed. This is the most important moment of the journey. If you are experiencing these feelings, let me know where you are in the dissolving process of the identity. Comment, I can feel the old identity leaving me, to confirm to yourself that the transformation is happening and that you are stepping into a deeper layer of the field. When the observer rises, you do not hear any sound and you do not see any clear sign. It does not appear as a moment of major change, but as a thin layer of stillness rising from beneath awareness, light but sharp, quiet but powerful. You notice this when you begin to see the distance between you and your emotions. In the past, you reacted as if the emotions were you, as if every thought that touched you instantly pulled you away. But when the observer appears, you see clearly that emotion is only a movement inside you. It is not you. Thought is only a signal. It is not identity. At that moment, the flow of awareness splits into two parts. The familiar part belonging to the reactive mind and the new part belonging to the awakening layer opening its eyes from within. The observer does not speak, does not argue, does not lead you with words. Its presence is as simple as watching water flow without needing to touch it. You see the emotions rising, you see the thoughts running through, you see yourself preparing to react out of old habit, but this time you do not jump into it, you pause. And this pause is the proof that the observer has risen. This small pause is a kind of power you never had before. It is evidence that you have stepped out of the automatic operating layer. The rise of the observer is the moment when you are no longer led by the old story. You begin to see everything from a higher vantage point, as if you are no longer mixed with the impulses of life, but standing above them, seeing the whole picture. You see that anger is not you. You see that fear is not you. You see that doubt is not truth. You see that old memories no longer hold the same power. In the past, you were often thrown off by small things, a word, a look, an unexpected situation. Now they all feel like light movements in space. They no longer have the force to make you fall. The observer rises by pulling you back to the center. Your center has always existed, but the old identity and layers of emotion used to cover it. Now that these layers are dissolving, the center appears like light cutting through fog, unhurried but definite, quiet but undeniable. When you stand from the position of the observer, everything becomes clearer. You begin to see the origin of emotions, see the beliefs beneath reactions, see the way the mind constructs stories and makes you believe them. You see how the body reacts before the mind understands what is happening, and when you see all of it, you are free. The observer does not control emotion, does not suppress it, does not try to shut it down. It simply watches with stillness, like watching a cloud drift. In that gaze, emotions lose their power, thoughts weaken on their own. Old psychological loops break naturally. When you begin to see everything from the observer layer, you become less judgmental, but sharper about essence. You react less, but you are more sensitive to truth. You are no longer pulled by external forces, but you perceive the external world more deeply. This is the point where life begins to change according to you, instead of you chasing after it. The rise of the observer also makes you see the energy of others clearly. You recognize what is genuine speech and what is performed expression. You recognize what is real connection and what is bonding based on need. When you see the essence, you no longer get pulled into draining interactions. You become calm naturally, not because you try to act calm, but because you see everything from an altitude where it no longer affects you the same way. This is calmness born from awareness, not from suppression. The observer is also the part that allows you to look at yourself without self-condemnation. In the past, you looked at your mistakes with shame. Now you look with objectivity. You see the cause, you see the pattern, you see the unconsciousness in your reactions. And when you see clearly, you no longer repeat. The observer is like a doorway to reprogramming. Every true change does not come from forced effort. It begins from seeing the root cause. When you see the root, the change happens naturally, not by trying to become someone else, but by returning to the true part of yourself. When the observer rises, you also begin to see clearly which voice inside you is true and which voice is an echo from the outside, such as family, society, old fears. The true voice is light, but clear. The external echo is loud but shallow. The observer helps you distinguish between the two. When you recognize the difference, you stop living according to external expectations. You begin living according to your own rhythm. This rising is the most important step, to dive deeper into the field, because the field only opens fully when you see life as data, not as a battlefield. When you stand in the observer position, what once looked like big problems becomes information. Emotions that once made you collapse become signals. Memories that once held you back become data to understand yourself. And it is here that you experience the first taste of freedom since the beginning of the journey. Freedom is not the absence of emotion. Freedom is seeing emotion without being carried away. Freedom is not the absence of thought. Freedom is not being controlled by thought. Freedom is not abandoning everything. Freedom is knowing what belongs to you and what is only dust from the past. The observer rises in silence. But once it has appeared, you can never go back to the old way. You have entered a new layer of awareness. And the rest of the journey will be guided by this vantage point. This is the moment you truly begin to see life with your real eyes. But the quantum crack does not appear as a mystical event or a glamorous spiritual experience. It arrives as a very thin fracture in perception, small enough for the unconscious to ignore, but deep enough for the awakening mind to recognize that reality has just opened an additional layer. The special nature of this crack lies in the fact that it does not separate you from life, but separates you from your old operating pattern. You stand in the same room, hear the same sounds, see the same space, but in that moment you know you are no longer perceiving them in the old way. A very subtle boundary has just been pierced, and you are the only one who feels that shift. When the quantum crack opens, the first thing you feel is not unease, but a stillness so deep that even the sound of the room feels as if it is waiting for you to enter a new layer. This stillness is not external silence, but internal silence, a settling in the deepest layer of consciousness. You feel as if another space is blooming behind every small movement, behind every breath. Everything around you is still in the same place, but you are no longer attached to it. You sense the near transparency of reality. This sensation makes you understand that there is a hidden operational layer of the world you have never touched before. The quantum crack does not open through images or light. It opens through a change in the way you perceive yourself. If before you looked at life with your eyes, now you look at life with the space between two glances. If before you reacted out of habit, now you feel the pause before the reaction appears. In that pause, the doorway to the field begins to open. As you step closer to the crack, you realize that the things that once felt heavy or sticky begin to slip away, not because you try to let go, but because they no longer match your vibrational structure. Repetitive thoughts suddenly lose their grip. Fears that once haunted you seem to have no place to stand. Even defensive reaction patterns become loose and far easier to observe. None of this happens because you changed through willpower, but because a deeper layer in you changed before your mind could define it. The field does not open before the mind, the field opens before the body. And the quantum crack is the first point where the body recognizes this expansion. You feel that the expansion does not occur outside, but happens in the depth of perception. As if another layer of space has just been added inside you, and this layer has no boundary, no limit, no weight. From this layer, you see everything with a clarity you never had before. Every movement of others, every frequency in a conversation, every fleeting emotion inside you becomes as clear as watching a stream of water flowing under sharp light. When the crack opens, you also begin to sense a change in the rhythm of time. Time does not stop, but you begin to see beats you used to miss. Your body feels the slight delay in every movement, as if you were standing in a different time layer, not faster or slower, but wider. That wideness gives you a perspective that rises above the old pattern. In the crack, you also see clearly the artificial layers of the ego. Everything you once chased to prove your worth becomes thin and light enough to see through. You see that defensiveness is no longer necessary. You see that the effort to please others is only an old habit, not the truth of your being. You see that even the pains you once thought were permanent now look like faded ink on the surface. When the crack opens, the truth always rises. Your truth, the truth of others, and the truth of life. Not truth in the sense of logic, but truth in the sense of energy. You sense what aligns, what misaligns, what flows, what drags you down. Your intuition becomes sharper because you are no longer blinded by emotional turbulence. In the quantum crack, everything becomes light but not weak. Light because it does not cling, strong because its essence is clear. In this crack, you begin to see the parallel operation of two realities. An old reality built on reaction, habit, ego. A new reality built on observation, frequency, awareness. You stand at the intersection of these two currents, and your body will choose the direction before your mind does. If you find yourself naturally leaning towards stillness and clarity, that is the sign you are stepping toward the field. The deepest truth about the crack is that it always opens exactly when you are ready. It does not open when you try to seek it, force it, or push yourself into a higher state. It opens when you are light enough to feel the subtle layers. Every awakening journey passes through this crack, whether people name it or not. This is the moment you step out of the old limits. Without needing to break violently through anything, you glide into a new layer through stillness. No shattering, no drama, only clarity and expansion. When you stand inside the crack, you realize that this is not a place to fear. This is the doorway to the deepest part of your being. From here, you begin to see pathways you could not see before. You begin to see choices that the old mind would never accept. You begin to see the new self moving toward you. The quantum crack is not just change, it is rebirth. You are not losing anything, you are rising, but you are not breaking your old life. You are walking through it and seeing the true layer beneath everything. And from this moment, the doorway to the field does not only open, it invites you deeper. Entering the field is not an explosive moment or a spiritual event that overwhelms you. It is like stepping into a room where the light has been adjusted. Everything is still familiar, but no longer resonates at the same frequency. You do not see the field with your eyes, you feel it through the way your body and awareness simultaneously expand without any effort. When you truly step into the field, your awareness becomes sharp and wide, as if a second layer of consciousness is operating in parallel. seeing everything from a height your old mind could never reach. What you once considered random begins to show rhythm. Encounters, emotions, thoughts, even moments of silence carry a structure you never noticed before. In the field, everything has its own logic. Not the rigid logic of the mind, but the soft logic of energy. When you enter this layer, you sense the subtlety of every movement around you. A passing glance tells you who is open and who is guarded. A short sentence reveals the energy behind it. Even someone's silence becomes a signal. The field makes everything as clear as glass that has just been wiped clean, revealing essence without distortion. The first thing you notice in the field is that you are no longer pulled by emotional currents the way you used to be. Emotions still appear, but they no longer push you. They pass like water flowing across a bank. You see them clearly, but you no longer jump in and get carried away. This is not numbness, it is freedom. This freedom comes from standing in the observer position instead of living through reaction. The field does not separate you from life, it separates you from the unconscious layer of life. Because of this, you begin to feel a spaciousness in your spirit that you have never touched before. You no longer judge others as quickly as before. You no longer interpret things through old fears. You no longer create stories from things that have never happened. You see life through data, not through pain or old memory. Entering the field also makes you see yourself with a precision you never had. You see clearly where you are still tense. You see where you are still defensive. You see where you still repeat the old pattern. But the important part is that you no longer blame or condemn yourself. You look with truth. And that truth frees you from old attachments. The field does not make you perfect. It makes you honest. And this honesty is the foundation for restructuring your entire being. When you stand in the field, you also realize that your energy becomes more refined. Things you once tried to maintain begin to fall away because they no longer match your new frequency. Relationships based on need can no longer hold you. Emotionally heavy conversations no longer attract you. Goals built only to prove yourself become meaningless, not because you're above them, but because you are clear. You are clear about what comes from your true self and what is only the product of fear or external expectation. Clarity is the most important factor in the field. From this clarity, you begin to sense your direction without forcing yourself to know or to choose. The field operates through synchronicity. When you stand in the right frequency, everything flows with you instead of you chasing it. Right choices appear light and simple. Wrong things fall away quickly without disruption. You do not need to force anything to leave. The field automatically removes what does not belong to the new frequency. Many people think entering the field means stepping into a state detached from life, but the truth is the opposite. You become closer to life than ever, but life no longer pulls you around. You participate in every interaction with high presence without losing your inner stability. You handle situations that once made you panic with a calmness that surprises even yourself, not because you are trying to act strong, but because you are no longer operating from reaction. The field places you in a layer of awareness where every problem becomes a signal for growth. You see direction in every disruption, message in every emotion, lesson in every challenge. Nothing is an accident or chaos anymore. Everything has rhythm. And you can read that rhythm. When you are in the field, your body also changes the way it responds. It becomes light, open, flexible, less tense. The heaviness in your chest softens. Mental noise reduces. You no longer feel trapped in an inner storm. You have space. That space is where your new self begins to form. In the field, you are no longer pulled back by old memories. Those memories still exist, but they no longer hold you. They are like past images you can see but no longer feel attached to. This lack of attachment is the sign that you have moved beyond the old pattern. The field also gives you a new ability, the ability to see possibilities. Before you saw only one path, the familiar ego pointed to. In the field, you see many openings at once. You see clearly what will take you to a higher layer and what will pull you down. You begin choosing by frequency instead of fear or habit. This is the true maturity of awareness. And once you have stepped into the field even once, you can never return to the old way. You have seen a deeper layer of the world, a lighter layer, a wider layer, a truer layer. That layer is where your true self operates. And from here, every step you take will be guided by this new level of awareness, because once you have seen the field, you cannot pretend you have not seen it. The collapse of the old frequency begins at the exact moment you step deeper into the field. It is not loud, not dramatic, and not anything the mind once imagined about transformation. It unfolds as a natural separation when the energetic layers that once clung tightly to you begin to lose their grip. It is not you who actively releases them. They fall off because they are no longer compatible. The old frequency collapses not because you are weakening, but because you have risen to a level of awareness where the old structures cannot survive. The first thing you feel in this collapse is exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, but energetic fatigue. Fatigue because the old reactions ask you to repeat them, but your body no longer wants to maintain them. Fatigue because you are living in an old frequency that your new self no longer has the patience to endure. Fatigue because you are standing between two vibrations. The old frequency is heavy, the new frequency is light, and your body is leaning toward the light. When the old frequency begins to collapse, you notice that the things that once felt stable in you suddenly become loose. The things you once claimed with certainty no longer feel true. The reactions that used to appear instantly now appear slowly, as if you are watching them from a distance. That slowness is a sign. It shows you are stepping out of the unconscious loop. When the old frequency falls, the meaning of many things in your life falls with it. Goals you once thought were important suddenly become meaningless. People you once relied on no longer give you a sense of connection. Old pains you once believed were impossible to overcome become faint like old dreams. You are not forcing yourself to let them go, they slide off on their own. That is the nature of frequency collapse. You do not fight to free yourself. The old frequency simply cannot hold you anymore. When the old frequency collapses, your body reacts before your mind. You find it difficult to maintain habits that once served the old identity. Draining conversations exhaust you faster. Chaotic environments make it hard to breathe. Words that are not truthful make you want to leave. Things that once triggered you no longer affect you as strongly, not because you are numb, but because you no longer live inside their vibration. You have moved into another layer, and in that layer, the old things have no power. This collapse also shows itself most clearly in the way you react to yourself. The inner criticism that once made you shrink now echoes like a distant voice. You hear it, but you no longer believe it. You feel that the part speaking is not you, but the old identity trying to hold on to its role. And the more you observe, the weaker it becomes. This is the most important sign of frequency shift. The old frequency exists only when you are pulled into it. When you stand outside and watch it, it loses structure. When the old frequency collapses, you will experience empty spaces. Moments where you are not sure who you are, seconds where you stand between two lives, belonging to neither the old nor fully the new. This empty space can cause anxiety if you cling to old habits to feel in control. But if you allow yourself to stand still in this emptiness, you will realize this is the purest stage of rebirth. The empty space is where the new frequency installs itself, not through action, not through effort, not through explanation, but through space that allows the new self to take form inside you. When the old frequency collapses, you also see clearly the relationships that no longer hold their structure. Connections built on lack, fear of abandonment, or the need for validation begin to fracture, not because you are cold, but because your new frequency no longer aligns with them. You are not pushing anyone away, but your body rejects connections that are lower than your new truth. At this stage, many people feel they are losing too much at once, but the truth is, You are only leaving behind what has expired. The field does not take what is yours. It only removes what is no longer needed for the next vibration. The collapse of the old frequency also shows you why you once repeated your old patterns. You see the wrong identifications. You see the limiting beliefs planted in you since childhood. You see the memories that turned into reactions. And when you see the deepest cause, the pattern naturally dissolves. This is when you step into inner freedom. Not freedom from life, not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from the structures that held you for too long. When the old frequency collapses completely, you feel a lightness you cannot explain. Lightness, not because everything becomes easy, but because you are no longer fighting yourself. The body is no longer compressed. The mind is no longer tangled. Awareness is no longer fogged. You stand inside yourself without needing to act strong. This collapse is not an ending. It is the foundation for the entire rest of the journey. You are preparing to carry the new frequency into real life. And before stepping into the next part, if you feel this message opened a new layer of awareness for you, gently like and share as a way to synchronize frequency and support the journey this channel is building with you. Not for numbers, but because the energy of companionship always creates momentum for those who are awakening. The detachment threshold is not the moment you abandon life or become cold toward everything around you. It is the point where you stop being governed by the emotional layers, reactions, and old patterns that once operated you unconsciously. This is the moment you stand at the boundary between the person who lives through memory and the person who now lives through awareness. When you reach this threshold, you realize you are no longer pulled into the things that once threw you off balance. You hear a sentence but no longer react out of habit. You feel an emotion, but you are no longer pushed by it. You remember a memory, but no longer fall back into the old story. Everything still appears, but you stand at another layer, watching it like small movements in a quiet space. This detachment is not effort. It is the natural result of having passed through the quantum crack, having entered the field, and having witnessed the collapse of the old frequency. When the old frequency no longer holds you, you automatically slide toward the neutral point of awareness. The detachment threshold is exactly that neutral point. Here you are no longer attached to any extreme, not attached to hope, not attached to fear, not attached to expectation, not attached to disappointment. Everything becomes clear without any need to control the outcome. When you enter this threshold, the first thing you feel is lightness in the mind, a kind of lightness not born from avoidance, but from no longer carrying the heavy layers of meaning you used to place on every experience. You realize you have lived too long through interpretation. You attached emotion to every situation, attached stories to every event, attached fear to every choice. And now, when the detachment threshold opens, you see everything exactly as it is, without adding and without subtracting. Truth is always light when it is not wrapped in interpretation. Detaching the mind also lets you see the true nature of attachment. You begin to realize that most pain in you does not come from what happened, but from the need to cling to it. You hurt not because someone did something, but because you wanted them to be different. You felt anger not because of the event, but because you wanted the outcome to match your desire. You feared the future not because it was vague, but because you wanted to control what cannot be controlled. When you stand in the detachment threshold, these mechanisms become obvious and you no longer want to engage with them. Not because you matured intellectually, but because you see the uselessness of clinging. Clinging to pain drags you down. Clinging to others makes you dependent. Clinging to outcomes steals your freedom. Clinging to an old identity prevents you from stepping into the new layer. Detachment is not turning away from life, it is entering life without losing yourself. When you stand in this threshold, every interaction becomes purer. You listen, not to react, but to understand. You look not to judge but to see. You act not to prove anything, but because it aligns with your frequency. This neutrality is where real strength forms. You are not shaken by praise or criticism. You are not pulled by admiration or doubt. You stand still as a center point, and this steadiness makes everything around you adjust to you. The detachment threshold is also revealed most clearly in challenges. Things that once rattled you now appear as small tests. You see them as signals showing how far you have come. You no longer want to win every situation. You want to stay clear inside. This is the most important shift of this phase. In the detachment threshold, you no longer choose from fear. You also no longer choose from desire. You choose from frequency, from the sense of what is true for you, what makes you expand, what makes you lighter, what makes you more stable, what you can step into without sacrificing your truth. This kind of choice creates a new life path, not based on reaction, but based on awakening. The profound part is that when you detach, everything that is not yours simply falls away. You do not need to push anyone out. You do not need to cut off relationships. You do not need to create distance. You only need to stand in your true frequency. Lower things will leave on their own because they no longer find a matching point. Detachment does not create loss. It reveals what was never meant for you. This threshold is also where you begin to feel the power of silence. Silence is no longer avoidance, but the space where your awareness functions most clearly. You observe the small movements in the body, in emotions, in thoughts, and you see everything operating without needing your willpower to control it. You see every one of your reactions has a cause, and when you see that cause, the reaction dissolves. This is the deepest wisdom of detachment. The way you free yourself from loops without fighting or forcing. In the detachment threshold, you become light but deep, less reactive but clearer, less talkative but truer, less effortful but more effective. This is the state where you begin to touch your true self, where the old layers fall and the core remains. This threshold is not the end, it is the doorway that leads you to the phase of recalibrating the entire internal field. And from this vantage point, you can finally step into the next stage of the journey, where the new frequency does not only exist in you, but begins to operate you. So the recalibration of the internal field begins right after you cross the detachment threshold and recognize that both your inner and outer world are undergoing structural change. This is not a process that happens in a single moment, but a continuous adjustment across every layer of awareness. It is like an old operating system being removed and a completely new version being installed, lighter, more precise, and aligned with the vibration you have just stepped into. Your body is the first place where recalibration is felt. You begin to notice yourself breathing deeper without trying, as if there is more space for air to enter. The unconscious tension in your shoulders, neck, chest, and stomach starts to loosen bit by bit. You do not need to focus on relaxing. The relaxation happens because the old energy is being released. In this phase, you may experience days when your body feels unusually light and days when your body feels slightly tired, but not tired in the physical sense. Tired because old energetic layers are withdrawing from the system, as if outdated programs are being removed from your structure. This is a positive sign because no recalibration happens without removing what is old. The internal field does not only change the way you feel, but also the way you process information. Thoughts that once rushed through your mind like a flood now become clearer and more orderly. You see the connection between emotion and thought. You recognize that every thought is linked to a signal in the body, and when you see this connection, you are no longer pulled into thought. You begin to realize that most of what you once believed you could not control was merely neurological habit repeated over the years. When the internal field recalibrates, these habits begin to weaken. You no longer react out of impulse. You no longer create stories to fill emotional gaps. You no longer trap yourself in loops of overthinking. The miracle is that none of this happens because you force yourself to change. It happens because the new vibration no longer supplies energy to the old reactions. Within this recalibration, you will also begin to see clearly the parts of yourself that were previously overlooked. Small but persistent fears, beliefs you thought you had outgrown but still operated silently, fragments of memories that seemed old but still created heaviness when someone touched the right spot. All of these parts rise not to weaken you but to be seen and released. Recalibration always comes with the illumination of hidden corners within you. When the light of awareness touches a part that has been hidden, that part loses its power to pull you down. You see it, you understand it, and it dissolves. In the past, you thought you had to fight these wounds, but in the field, you only need to observe them with truth, without adding interpretation, without judgment, without trying to fix. Observation is the way energy adjusts itself. When the internal field changes, the way you perceive others also changes. You sense the vibration of each person without needing analysis. You see who comes to you with truth and who comes from their emptiness. You see who expands your energy and who contracts it. In the past, you were led by these feelings without understanding them. Now you see clearly. Every interaction becomes data, not intellectual data, but energetic data. Recalibration also stabilizes your nervous system. You no longer react instantly to small triggers. Things that once made you anxious no longer dominate your mind. This calmness does not come from effortful control, but from the fact that low vibrations are no longer compatible with you. When the internal field changes, negative thoughts do not fade because you push them away, but because they no longer have a source of energy. You no longer feed them with attention. You no longer believe the old stories they create. You no longer repeat the old patterns. When you stop feeding them, they die on their own. This leads to one of the most important transformations: clarity. Clarity about yourself, clarity about others, clarity about what needs to stay and what has completed its role. Clarity about directions you could not see before. This clarity does not create pressure. It creates ease. Because when you are clear, you do not need to cling to anything. You do not need to chase anything. You do not need to fix anyone. You simply stand in your own energy, and what matches will come, what misaligns will leave. Recalibration also changes the way you face the future. You no longer imagine the worst scenarios to protect yourself. You no longer prepare for the worst because of fear of being hurt. You live with the calmness of someone who knows that everything is unfolding in the right rhythm, not because you blindly believe in positivity, but because you feel a sense of inner coherence. You do not need to predict the future. You only need to stand in the right vibration. When you stand in the right vibration, the future finds you. In the recalibration phase, you begin returning to your most natural state where you do not need to hide, defend, or prove anything. Your energy reorganizes itself according to its true structure. And from this alignment, a new self is forming, deep, light, steady, and true. This is the foundation that every next step will rely on, because when the internal field is recalibrated, you no longer live through memory. You live through awareness. And awareness always leads you in the right direction. The signal of the new self does not appear as a clear declaration or as a sudden awakening moment that instantly makes you realize you have changed. It begins as a subtle movement in the deepest layer of energy, a light yet sharp frequency emitted from within you and then sent into the field. Like a particle of light finding its way through darkness, this is the stage where the new self has not yet taken full form, but you feel it being transmitted, like an encoded signal sent from the center of awareness, moving through every old layer to announce the emergence of a new version of you. When this signal is sent into the field, your body is the first to notice. You will feel moments that do not belong to logic, but are deeply convincing. Moments when you suddenly understand what is right for you without thinking. Moments when you feel peace flooding into you for no apparent reason. Moments when you know you will never return to the old way, even though you cannot yet see the full form of who you are becoming. These moments are proof that the signal has left the internal layer and is being responded to by the field. The field always responds to frequency. When you emit a new signal, the field rearranges paths, people, situations, and opportunities that align with that frequency. But before you see change outside, you will see change within yourself. The signal of the new self functions like a reprogramming process. It rearranges your priorities. It changes how you make decisions. It makes things that once intimidated you fade. It clarifies what used to be vague. It pushes you away from things you once held on to and pulls you closer to what you always knew was yours, but were once afraid to move toward. In this stage, you feel as if you are living between two layers of reality. One old part of you is still dissolving while the new signal is shaping how you perceive life. You experience moments where everything outside seems unchanged, but inside you, layers are being rearranged according to a new structure. You find yourself calmer in situations that once tightened you. You find yourself no longer fitting into old roles. You find yourself unwilling to compromise with anything that lowers your vibration. All of this is evidence that the signal of the new self is being installed into your patterns. The special thing about this transmission phase is the emergence of intuition, so clear you cannot ignore it. Not intuition as temporary emotion, but intuition as knowing. This knowing does not come from analysis. It comes from the synchronization between your inner energy and the field's response outside. You begin to see signs appear in cycles, repeating numbers, non-random encounters, situations closing and opening in a precise sequence. You see events falling into place as if someone is restructuring your entire timeline. None of this is random. The signal of your new self is organizing reality. This phase also makes you sensitive to what no longer fits. You feel when someone speaks without truth. You see clearly when a situation no longer serves your growth. You notice the slight mismatch between a person's words and their energy. This ability is not judgment, it is frequency recognition. When the signal of the new self is broadcast, you become more precise with truth than ever before. The interesting thing is that even before the new self appears fully, you already begin to live as it. You make decisions as if you are already that person. You choose directions as if you are already the higher version. You handle situations as if you have already outgrown the old pattern. This is what creates change. Change does not happen when the new version is clear. Change happens when you begin living according to its signal before you see its full form. When the signal is sent out, the field begins moving what does not fit out of your path. This may be the stage where you find yourself drifting away from certain people, habits, and environments. You may not know why, but you know within that these things no longer belong to the vibration you are stepping into. The signal of the new self does not keep anything just because it is familiar. It keeps only what matches the new structure. Every time you follow that signal, you move deeper into the version you are becoming. Every time you ignore it, you extend your stay in the old layer. But the signal does not disappear. It reminding you that you are being called toward a wider, deeper, truer self. As the signal strengthens, you will experience moments that feel as if you have stepped several steps into the future. You say something that does not sound like your old self. You make a decision you never would have dared to make. You reject things you once begged to keep. You move with a certainty you do not know the source of. This is proof of the transmission. You are not imagining, you are not performing. You are operating through the new frequency. And when you live according to that signal long enough, the new self does not remain a possibility. It becomes the only reality you accept. This is the moment you are no longer searching for yourself. You are becoming yourself. The signal of the new self sent into the field is the confirmation that you have left the old loop. And from this moment, your journey enters the phase of embodiment, where who you are becoming begins to impact your physical life. Becoming the new frequency does not happen in a sudden flash of awakening or through a symbolic ritual. It happens through actions so small that if you lack presence, you will not realize that those very movements are anchoring your new version into reality. When the signal of the new self has been sent into the field, the next step is the harmony between energy and action, between frequency and the way you live each day. This is the stage that makes the change real, no longer something felt or perceived, but something that begins to take root in your physical life. The first thing that happens when you begin embodying the new frequency is a shift in the way you choose, not in big choices, but in choices so simple they seem insignificant. You choose to stay instead of running. You choose calm instead of reacting. You choose truth instead of pleasing. You choose to stand in your real self instead of sliding back to old habits. These small choices are the foundation of the new frequency, and because they are small, they happen continuously, quietly, yet they create the deepest shift. In this stage, you will notice something remarkable. The actions you once had to try hard to maintain now become natural. You no longer need to remind yourself to stay calm. You are calm because you are stable inside. You no longer need to restrain yourself. There is nothing to restrain because you are no longer in the reactive layer. You no longer need to convince yourself to go in the right direction. The right direction becomes the only direction you want. This is the clearest sign that you have begun living in the new frequency. When the new frequency shapes itself, your body becomes a filter. Anything that does not match the new vibration creates an immediate sense of misalignment. Heavy conversation makes you want to leave. A small, inauthentic act makes your energy close. A sentence lacking truth disconnects you instantly. This is not you being difficult. This is the purity of the new frequency. The new frequency rejects what does not belong to it. And when you live according to this frequency, you begin to feel the lightness in every decision. Before you lived with the fear of choosing wrong. Now you live with the sense of choosing what is in frequency. Before you were pulled by emotion, now you move through clarity. Before you chose to be accepted, now you choose to keep your inner truth intact. Every small action becomes a step that anchors your frequency into real life. The special part of this stage is the silence in transformation. You do not feel the need to announce your change to anyone. You do not need to prove you have changed. You live differently, and the way you live speaks for everything. Those who once knew you will notice you no longer react the same. You no longer get pulled into arguments. You are no longer affected by praise or criticism. No longer chase validation, yet you are not cold or withdrawn. On the contrary, you become more present, more refined, and more gentle. This is the strength of the new frequency. Strong not because of armor, but because there is no need for armor. When you embody the new frequency, you also see clearly the difference between effortful change and real change. Effort comes from the ego. Real change comes from vibration. When action comes from effort, you have to remind yourself constantly, when action comes from the new frequency, it flows seamlessly. For example, before you had to try not to text someone to keep your value, now you do not want to text because the energy no longer matches. Before you try to appear calm in difficulties, now you are calm because there is no old vibration inside you to trigger. Before you reminded yourself to choose the better option, now you cannot choose the lower one because you immediately feel the misalignment in your body. This is the difference between action from the mind and action from frequency. When you embody the new frequency, your life also begins to restructure. The right people appear at the right time. The right opportunities open lightly. The wrong doors close without force. Places that used to make you anxious become quiet. Places that used to make you feel lost become distant. You no longer chase life. Life begins responding to you. This is the natural law of the field. The field always arranges according to frequency. Entering the embodiment stage also brings you to a subtle but important truth. You will no longer accept what no longer fits just because it is familiar. You will no longer stay in relationships that no longer have quality. You will no longer keep habits that drain your energy. You will no longer allow misaligned things into your field. Not because you are cold, but because you understand the value of your inner stability. Your new frequency needs space to operate. When you live according to it, you become clear but not rigid, strong but not closed, gentle but not weak. You act with inner calm, not to prove anything, not to achieve anything, but because that is how you keep your truth intact. The greatest transformation of this stage lies in the realization that you are no longer searching for the new self, you are becoming it, not in the future, in every smallest action of today. What you say, what you hold back, what you choose to step into, what you decline, what you feel, what you stay silent about, all of it is embodiment. You cannot pretend to embody a frequency, you can only become it. And when you truly live in the new frequency, you understand that change never lives in explosive moments. It lives in the tiny details others do not see, but the field sees, the field responds. And your reality begins to shift exactly according to the frequency you have become. This is the moment. You are no longer standing at the edge of the journey. You are in the journey. You are no longer seeing the new self from afar. You are living inside it. And from here, your entire life will begin to rearrange in alignment with who you are becoming. The inner state of sovereignty does not appear when you eliminate all fears or reach absolute perfection, but when you stand in the deepest position of yourself and realize that no external force can determine your direction anymore. This is the layer of awareness where the fluctuations that once destabilize you now touch only the surface and cannot penetrate the core. You do not become invulnerable by building walls or suppressing emotions. You become invulnerable because you have seen the true nature of everything, and from that you navigate life with a clarity untouched by the need to prove or the fear of loss. When the sovereign state forms, you no longer feel the need to rise above anyone, no longer feel the need to protect a certain version of yourself, no longer try to control situations. You become the center point. The center point is not a still position, it is the place where all movements around you no longer have enough weight to pull you out of your own field. You see life through the frequency of steady calm, not cold but deep, not indifferent but clear, not avoiding but grounded. One of the first signs of the sovereign state is that you no longer react automatically to external stimuli. Disrespectful words that once hurt you now pass like wind. Unexpected situations that once stirred your rhythm now resemble small changes on the water surface. You see them, but you do not lose your center. You no longer need to fight back or explain or prove yourself. Inner stability allows you to observe before choosing to act, and this very pause creates the deepest freedom. At this layer, you begin to understand that nothing outside defines your worth. No gaze, no praise, no criticism, no recognition. No one has the authority to give you a sense of worthiness, and no one has the authority to take it away. You no longer seek validation, you become the source of validation. This state is not arrogance, it is awakening. When you know clearly who you are, you no longer need anyone to remind you of it. When inner sovereignty rises, your steadiness becomes something others can feel without you having to show it. You walk into a space and people feel your energy before you say anything. Not because you project dominance, but because you are no longer fragmented. A fragmented person is easily shaken. A unified person generates a stable field that others sense instantly. This is the power of wholeness. When you are in this state, you no longer need to involve yourself in battles that are not yours. You are no longer pulled into energy-draining situations. You see the ego games clearly, and you are no longer interested in participating. You choose honesty instead of debating right or wrong. You choose stillness instead of fighting to win. You choose truth instead of the need to be right. This is not withdrawal, this is transcendence. Those who have not reached this layer may think you are avoiding, but in reality, you simply stop investing energy into what no longer belongs to your vibration. Inner sovereignty also shifts the way you face pain. Pain no longer breaks you, it sharpens you. Instead of being absorbed by emotion, you observe it as data. You see the cause, you see the pattern, you see the old limitation running. And because you see clearly, you no longer get trapped. This is the most natural form of healing. Not healing through force or analysis, but through truth. When you are in the sovereign state, you also begin separating from expectation. Expectation is what once made you cling to others, cling to the future, cling to outcomes. But now you see that expectation is a subtle form of control. When you release expectation, you enter the freedom of what is happening. It does not mean you have no goals. It means you no longer let the result determine your inner stability. Your spirit no longer depends on anything external. You still act, but without the bind of needing to achieve. You still invest energy, but without needing guarantees. You still open your heart, but without losing yourself. When sovereignty is established, your love also changes its quality. You do not love from lack, you love from fullness. You do not bond from fear of losing, you bond from choosing. You do not need anyone to fill your empty space. You allow them to exist because they resonate with your frequency. This is the most mature form of connection, where neither depends on the other to stand, but both stand strong and elevate each other's frequency. The sovereign state also gives you the ability to see direction without needing to know the entire path. You have an inner trust, a sense that every step you take is in rhythm, not right in the sense of perfection, but right in the sense of being true to your frequency. This trust does not come from blind belief, but from having faced yourself enough, released enough layers, detached enough, recalibrated enough, and embodied enough of your new self in action. Sovereignty does not come from surface strength. It comes from the alignment of what you think, what you feel, what you choose, and what you do. When these four layers line up, you no longer need to compete for position or seek external guidance. You become your own guide. And from this state, your entire life begins to move in a natural, sharp, light, powerful rhythm. This is the frequency you have been seeking for a long time. Not to be above anyone, but to return to the deepest part of yourself, the part that was never wounded, never conditioned, never distorted. That part is now operating you. And that is true sovereignty. When you step back into real life with the new self, you realize that the world has not changed. You have. Everything around you still moves in its old rhythm, but the way you interact with each detail has shifted to an entirely different layer. This is not a return in the way people usually imagine. This is a form of re-emergence where you bring a new frequency, a new operating system, and a new structure of awareness into familiar situations with a completely different quality. You do not return as the old person. You return to live as the one you have become. Stepping into real life with the new self is not a decisive action, but a series of recognitions. You notice that you no longer react the way you used to. You notice that you are no longer pulled into old loops. You notice that the things that once made you anxious no longer have weight. You notice that your strength no longer comes from forcing yourself, but from a deep stillness inside. This is the return of someone who has seen themselves. In this stage, you begin interacting again with familiar environments, but you stand in them differently. Conversations that once drained you now become so clear that you can step out of them gently without guilt. Relationships that once made you shrink no longer have the power to affect you. You see their mechanisms and you stand outside them with complete calm. You no longer want to be accepted, you want to be true. You no longer seek recognition, you become recognition. This return also shows you clearly which path aligns with the new self. Before, you used to force yourself into choices your heart did not agree with because of fear of change. But now you stand in your truth, and from that place the right path opens naturally, as if it has always been waiting for you. You are no longer afraid of turning directions. You are no longer afraid of losing anything. You know that anything leaving you is simply something that has completed its role. This is the freedom of a mind that has become clear. The interesting thing is that when you step back into real life, you do not feel you need to maintain the new frequency. It becomes your natural state. You do not have to try to be calm, you have become calm. You do not have to force yourself to be mature, you have become mature. You do not have to act strong, you have become strong. What once were your goals have now become your nature. In this return, life also begins to respond to you in a very different way. The right people arrive, the right opportunities appear, the right doors open. Not because you are lucky, but because you are aligned. The field always responds to frequency. When you change your frequency, life changes its structure. The return is not the peak of the journey, but the point where the journey becomes real. You begin to see clearly why you had to go through each previous stage, from the smallest micro shift to the collapse of the old frequency, to the rise of the observer, to entering the field, to the recalibration, to the transmission of the new identity, to the sovereign state. No step was unnecessary. All of them prepared for this moment, the moment you step into real life without losing yourself. When you live as the new self, you are no longer pulled into the chaos of the world. You bring your stillness and place it into every situation you move through. You become the stabilizing force in the space you touch. You do not go up and down with others. You do not open or close according to anyone's expectations. You operate by your own frequency, and this frequency is what causes the world around you to adjust to you. This is the power of returning to the true self. Return also means you begin expressing the new self through actual action, no longer standing only in the internal process. You begin creating things that belong to your vibration. You begin building, choosing, creating, connecting from the foundation you have just formed. You no longer act to fill a void, you act from fullness. You no longer look for anything outside to feel whole. You bring that wholeness with you everywhere. When you return, you also realize that every fear that once held you back has lost its power. You no longer fear what others think. You no longer fear being not enough. You no longer fear failure. You have gone through too many thin layers of the ego to know that failure is simply another form of restructuring. And because you understand this, you are no longer restrained by defensive psychology. You move with a freedom you've never had before. Finally, the return is the sign that your inner journey has completed a full cycle, and from here, you begin to live as the new self in real life, in real work, in real choices, in real interactions. This is not only the stage of awakening, but the stage of embodiment. You have become the person your old version never believed you could be. And if you are feeling the lightness, the clarity, and the steadiness within you, Know that you are standing exactly where you need to stand. Sending you a gentle and loving greeting. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this journey. Wishing you clarity, peace, and the deepest freedom as you continue your path with your new self. I will see you again in the next layers of awareness on this journey.